What they found is those people could not figure out what to eat for breakfast. They couldn't dress themselves in the morning. They could not make decisions. The limbic system, where we feel our emotions, is where decisions are made. Sales and sales conversations is all about appealing to the part of the brain that makes decisions, which is where the emotional part of the brain is. That's where the emotions are processed. So we want to get our prospects emotional. That's the really key point here. We want to use emotional language to trigger the part of the brain that makes the decision and makes the decision now. Welcome to the Close More Sales podcast. In this episode, we are going to do a deep dive into the psychology of sales, debunking the myth that persuasion is merely about convincing and convincing with logic. We're going to unravel sort of the complex interplay between the neocortex, the thinking part of the brain, and the limbic system, where decisions are truly made. Understanding that decisions spring from emotions, not just rational thought, not just the numbers, is a game changer in sales. This is not about bombarding your prospects with facts, but guiding them to a place of emotional certainty. Today, we're exploring how the language we use can shift the focus from cold logic to the warm, compelling pull of emotion. Why this matters is many salespeople, in fact, maybe even most, get stuck in a cycle of rebuttals against objections and logic-based selling, missing the fact that true persuasion involves tapping into the emotional undercurrents that drive decision-making. I will show you how mastering this approach can transform your sales techniques from ineffective attempts at persuasion to powerful influence. If you're ready to learn how to speak directly to the decision-making part of your prospect's brain, grab a notepad. Let's get started. But first, why listen to this show? The purpose of this show is to empower sales professionals and entrepreneurs to push themselves to grow, achieve unimaginable success without burning out, and ultimately transform their lives. I'm Ian Ross, and I am obsessed with all things sales, and I work with teams across the world at this point to make more money by asking better questions. The most proven path to achieving financial freedom is maximizing your earning potential. And a sales role is the lowest barrier with the highest possible ceiling for entry onto that path. Anyone can become a killer salesperson with the right techniques, mindset, and consistency. Everything we cover on this podcast is geared toward one thing: helping you close more sales so you can live the life you want. If you would like to get a sheet breaking down all the things we say on a follow-up call so you never say, "I'm just following up" or "I'm just checking in" ever again, text "follow up," that's 2 words, "follow up" to 33777, and we'll send you a template of what to say on the phone completely for free. Now, getting into it today. There's a neuroscience in decision-making, and this is super relevant in sales. Understand this idea if we think about almost like the brain structure. We'll dive here into the fascinating sort of interplay between the neocortex and the limbic system, the 2 critical areas of our brain involved in decision-making, so to speak. The neocortex handles our rational thoughts, the analytical processes we go through, and contextualizing language. Language is a very analytical thing. It's where the logical processing happens. In stark contrast to that, the limbic system is the center of our emotions. It's our feelings and instincts. This is where decisions are actually made. Understand that the limbic system, the same part that feels emotions, is where decisions are made. So playing to that part of the brain, activating it, is crucial. While the neocortex can process and rationalize all at once to sort of feed the rest of the brain, often the limbic system has the final say based on the emotional weight of the decision. This dynamic explains why emotional appeals can be far more persuasive than mere facts and figures. You all know this idea by now, hopefully. Sell the sizzle, not the steak, right? Don't sell the features, sell the benefits. Sell the story. Sell what this can actually do for you. Sell to the limbic system. Sell to the part of the brain that makes decisions. If we talk about this idea of emotion versus logic, there was a study done by a neuroscientist who he found that individuals who had damage to the part of the brain that generates emotions were incapable of making their own decisions. I mean, they did this with a type of lobotomy in like the early 20th century as well, too. I forget the exact timeline on this, but basically they removed the part of the brain to feel emotions and thought they would create these like calculating, emotionless, brilliant decision makers that would be able to operate rationally, remove their emotions from the situation, and make the most rational decision all the time. What they found is those people could not figure out what to eat for breakfast. They couldn't dress themselves in the morning. They could not make decisions. The limbic system, where we feel our emotions, is where decisions are made. Sales and sales conversations is all about appealing to the part of the brain that makes decisions, which is where the emotional part of the brain is. That's where the emotions are processed. So we want to get our prospects emotional. That's the really key point here. We want to use emotional language to trigger the part of the brain that makes the decision and makes the decision now. So the rational part, the part that's processing, even what I'm saying now, principally, the neocortex, it feeds everything else. But you should know this principle as well. The idea that people don't buy on logic, they buy on emotion. And the logic justifies that emotion afterwards. And you might have heard this, you might even try and apply it, but really understanding that this is a true principle demonstrated by science, by neuroscience, is really powerful. And if you can actually embrace a couple points of this, it will change how you sell, how effective you are, and what you're even in pursuit of in the first place, okay? In terms of a real-world application, in real-world sales conversations, this means if we use features and we use facts and we, in a way, even just use the benefits, we're merely engaging the neocortex, and we're missing out on a crucial emotional engagement element. Effective sales strategies all must tap into the limbic system, because to be effective means you inspire action, and you inspire action now. So helping your prospects feel understood and then emotionally connect themselves to the solution. So we'll talk about this in depth here. There's a thinking language problem that happens all the time in sales. When prospects use thinking language, they express themselves in logical and analytical terms. So this might sound something like, yeah, this is something I need to think about. I'm analyzing the numbers type of thing. This type of language often creates a psychological barrier. It's safe, it feels controlled, it also avoids commitment. Here's some common examples you've probably heard that demonstrates your prospect is using thinking language, meaning they are in the neocortex in terms of how they're processing whatever you're saying, which means they're not in the limbic system. So your prospect might say, yeah, this is something I need to think about. Oh, I guess that makes sense. I'm just analyzing the numbers. I just want to make sure this is a logical choice. I can see how this works. It's interesting. Yeah, I think I like what I'm seeing. That's demonstrating that they're in their thinking language. Now, compare this to emotional language, even negative emotional language. I don't feel ready yet. This feels right to me. I just want to feel confident in my decision. I need to feel like I'm not making a stupid mistake. You know what? I can picture myself doing this. This is exciting. This is terrifying. These are examples of emotional language. And what's crazy is that those later examples, even this is terrifying, I feel rushed, I'm just not sure, I'm just not feeling sure, that actually shows that your prospect is closer to a yes than, I like this, I think I like the numbers, this is looking good. I want to repeat that point because it is so important. The words your prospect gives back to you, there's one element, which is exactly what they're saying, which sounds to most people like something positive. Part of that is because salespeople are not aware of this idea, and they also have a tendency to have happy ears. This phenomenon that salespeople are always like, yeah, he's going to close. Yeah, this deal is definitely going to go through. By the very nature of being attracted to some type of role where you're paid commission means you probably have a little bit of that tendency. You have to survive the ups and downs to an extent. So you hear, I think I like this. I just need to run some numbers. You hear that and you think that means they're going to say yes. And so you get ready to go for the close. The problem is they're revealing to you a hidden layer. There's a hidden sales matrix that they are showing you that you are not seeing, which is that they are not emotional, which means they're not ready to make a decision because of the part of the brain that processes emotions is the exact same part of the brain that makes decisions. They tell you something that sounds logically good. Your salesperson ears gets turned on. You're like, they like this. They just need to run some numbers. But they haven't demonstrated they are ready to make a decision now. This is terrifying from your prospect, is closer to a yes than I think I like this. That is a hard concept for a lot of people to grasp, but it is absolutely fundamentally true in how people make decisions. It is also important to know that is closer to a no. This is terrifying is also closer to a no because it's closer to a decision. That's the most important concept. Nothing is worse than I think I like this because that implies a logical thinking part that will trick you as the salesperson into believing that they're ready to move forward. The problem is there is a delay tactic at play here from our prospects, which is them telling you something that sounds like yes, but fundamentally is not now. And not now is worse than no. You have to accept this idea to be confident in playing in this playground, in dancing on this dance floor, to use this battleground and play by these rules. You have to accept that a no is the second best answer. And a lot of salespeople know this, but they don't actually act on it. They hear yes, and they hear, I like this, call me back tomorrow so I can give you a yes then. And they view that as better than a no. And no is the worst case scenario. Even though they might mirror the language that no is the second best answer, they don't demonstrate that in practice. Embrace this idea and play on this battleground. Like this is the place to play, is understanding emotions drive decisions. This is terrifying and I feel rushed, is closer to a yes than I think I like this because it's emotional and emotional is closer to the decision. It is closer to a no, but it's also closer to a yes. That is really, really important. Once you embrace this point is when you can start utilizing some of the stuff I'm about to cover. So why do our prospects, why do people in general default to this type of analytical approach? Often it is about safety and control. Logic feels protective. It feels like it's preventing you from making mistakes. We evolved to be able to use it as such. It is also an aspect of social conditioning. Many people are trained to quote unquote think things through. And sometimes it's simply about avoiding commitment and showing you their hand. They want to play their cards close to their chest, so they keep things hypothetical because that means they don't have to make a real decision. In comparison to emotional language, if we contrast this type of language with emotional language, where you hear prospects say, I'm feeling unsure, or this feels right. Emotional language, when you're tuned to it, is engaging. It's certain. It commits to a stance. It shows you exactly what you want in a sales interaction. So
I'm filming this video for the man himself, Mr. Ian Ross. The guy crushes. The guy's the best person in sales I've ever seen. I've invested elsewhere and I haven't got the same results. I've gone from being a seller, making 5K a month, to being a hybrid role, making 11K a month, to now be 4 months down the line from 5K to on a closing opportunity, inbound, full calendar, with the best opportunity, the best offer in my space. OTE is around 20K a month from month 2. So I've gone from 5K to 20K. If that's not a return on your investment, I don't know what is, man. If you're a salesperson and you don't invest in sales training, you're going to get left behind because your job is to be better at sales. And sales training directly makes you more money.
My name is Lance McCann. I've recently switched sessions with Ian Ross. Those conversations with Ian has made me $50,000 in the past 2 deals that I've had. I was able to go back and renegotiate the original purchase price on one deal, and I saved $40,000, and I got another $10,000 off my other deals. Call Ian, give him a chance. You won't regret it.
If you like what you just heard and you'd like to have similar types of results, similar success, text CLOSE, CLOSE, to 33777, and we'll see if you qualify to join Advanced Sales Mastery. We are taking people from good to great.
You heard it here, which is that ultimately they might tell you something that sounds good, but ultimately your happy ears are tuned to it rather than the reality of whether or not they're ready to make a decision. So how do we transition our prospects into emotional language when they are stuck in logic? The first thing is to recognize that they are stuck in thinking mode. That's crucial, because if you try and push for the close when you realize that they're not ready to be closed, you're setting yourself up for failure regardless. So there's a certain shift that needs to happen to take them from thinking language to emotional language. As you approach the close, you want to guide your prospect from logic to emotion, but you want to do it by subtly reframing their words and focusing on how they feel. So first, step one to this is recognizing in the first place when they are stuck in logic, because some prospects might, by the nature of how you present stuff, demonstrate emotion normally. But if a prospect is stuck in thinking mode, they will say those things. They will say, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that makes sense. Let me just process this. I just need to run a few things. I just need to run some numbers. They'll use language like that. This means they are not emotionally invested enough to make a decision with you right now. Accept this reality, which means if you ask for a decision when they are in that state, you are shooting yourself in the foot. So first, recognize when they're in thinking language. Step two is to reframe and redirect with emotion. So instead of responding with more logic, which is how most salespeople respond to either a logic question, a logic statement, or an objection even. And you'll hear this all the time. You'll hear someone say, I need to think about this. And you even see professional sales trainers go, oh, what do you need to think about? You're still using thinking language when you ask that question. Instead, we want to subtly shift the conversation towards emotion so we can shift them towards making a decision. That's the idea. So here's how to think about it. Instead of saying, what do you need to think about? I would say something like, that makes sense. And then we would, just to validate and acknowledge, we then want to ask, do you feel like this is what you've actually been looking for? That's a yes, that's a closed off question. But if they go, yeah, I think so, we then want to get open-ended about it. How so? Can you tell me more about how it is what you're looking for, right? If I'm ever asking a closed off question, it is always done intentionally, and then I get open-ended afterwards to get them to verbalize. And the reason I do that is because closed-ended questions, again, questions that end in a yes or no, are easier to answer. So sometimes I give them a question that is intentionally closed off to make it easy for them to answer, and then I get open-ended in asking them to explain why they said yes. That's the principle here, because realistically, I want to ask open-ended questions, not closed-ended questions. Those of you closing off your statements and questions with closed-ended things are hurting your process and hurting your results. So if I'm ever asking a closed-off question, it's done strategically to then open up. So there's an example. So here, I'll say this again. Let's say they say, I just need to think about it. Instead, don't push, redirect. Say, I got it. If you don't mind me asking, which part in particular are you still just feeling unsure about? Okay, I shifted language. Do you see? Which part in particular are you still just feeling unsure about? This subtly shifts the way they're engaging with the decision and brings them closer to actually making it. This is the step. We want to ask an emotional question instead of a logic one. Then we drive the emotion stronger as we go for the close. As you move towards it, not only do you want the emotional reasoning and questions to outweigh in just pure volume. An example of this is always I always list the 3 pains we can solve when I go for a close. There's always variables in my closing questions that are based on their pain. You should also be focusing on questions about experience rather than understanding. So instead of saying, can you see yourself using this? Say, can you imagine how this would change things for you? Instead of saying, can you see yourself using this, say, can you imagine how this would change things for you, right? Sales is an aspect of change, right? So like, can you imagine how this would change things? Instead of saying, would this work for you? Ask, does this feel like the right move for you? And then once they verbalize a yes, clarify with something open-ended. How so? Can you tell me more about that? Instead of asking, does this sound good? Say, it seems like you're excited to get started. Remember, the goal is to engage with their emotions. Help them feel the decision, because that's where true decisions are made. When they feel right about a choice, that's when they move forward. We cover this a lot in our training, but I want to wrap up here because I touched on this very briefly. This is a whole deep dive hour training that I do. As we conclude today's episode of the podcast, which is really mastering emotional persuasion, how to recognize when our prospects are in thinking language and how to shift them to emotional. The key takeaway is simple yet profound. To truly influence your prospects' decisions, you must engage with their emotions, not just their intellect. So much of us are trying to sell to their intellect because that's what they're asking for. How much does this cost? What do I need for this? Those are all elements of trying to feed the neocortex, which then feeds the limbic system. The limbic system is where decisions are made. We've uncovered the real power of persuasion lies in the emotional resonance, not the logical augmentation. Think about this for what you are currently doing, how these insights, how what I just talked about in very simple terms can change your approach to sales. Instead of leaning into prepared rebuttals and logical presentations with numbers and facts and figures, focus on creating the emotional connections in your prospect. This shift not only enhances your persuasiveness, but it also builds deeper and more meaningful relationships with your prospects for those of you with longer sales cycles. So encourage your prospects to feel the value of your offerings rather than relying on explaining all the features, and that will naturally lead to way better outcomes. I invite you now, put these strategies into practice. Observe the difference in your sales interactions. Observe the difference in your results. Share your experiences about how adopting emotionally driven approach can impact what you actually do. Let us know either in the comments on YouTube, if you have any questions, or in a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Your feedback is invaluable. It helps us all grow together. And if you would like more advice or more coverage on this idea, if you're like, wow, that sounds really interesting, I want to learn more about this, we have a sales training program. It's not for people who are brand new to it. The goal of our program is to take people who are good and make them great. If you are brand new to sales, this concept might be a little bit too much for you. I understand that. I've said that multiple times for different episodes of the podcast. The goal is to get your prospects emotional. And we have a variety of tools and techniques to shift their thinking through our language so that the language they reveal back to us points towards the limbic system, which is where they make decisions. You can do this. We train on this all the time. People making way more money than you engaging with this process. The numbers, the facts, the figures, those are all condiments on the meal. The meal is the emotion they feel about all those things. Play to the emotions and you will drive the decision. I'm Ian Ross. This has been the Close More Sales Podcast.